Welcome to the weekly On the Beat segments here every Monday, brought to you by Ingles Grocery Stores. It's where you'd want to go right now to get some Halloween candy. Right now, you can get a bag of the Hershey's snack size bags, two for $6. That's a lot of chocolate at a really good price. And there's all sorts of specials there at Ingles. In fact, www.ingles-markets.com, where you can check it out and see all the prices that you can get some great Halloween candy deals on. And certainly, we know Georgia Bulldogs will be going dressed to Kentucky as wannabe SEC East Division champions if they beat the Wildcats on Saturday in Lexington. That's what Georgia will be. They'll be going back to the SEC championship game in Atlanta on December 1st. Apologize for a few earlier technical difficulties. We're here today to talk about Georgia Bulldogs coming off of a very impressive 36-17 win over Florida in Jacksonville at the Jaguars Stadium, DIAFF Bank Stadium, or whatever it's called right now. Colorful environment. The 50-50 split tickets was impressive. Florida crowd was late arriving and early to leave, quite frankly. Wasn't very impressed with them, but the Georgia faithful was there, and they made their presence felt. And they had a lot to cheer about. Kirby Smart and his players taking full use of that bye week. What the players said was a very humbling experience. The loss to LSU got Georgia back to work and back to the things that they do best, the execution. And certainly you saw it from Jake Fromm. But just a fantastic performance from Jake. 17 to 24, I want to say 240 yards, 3 touchdowns. Very efficient. About the only thing you left Jacksonville concerned with was Georgia's inability to score at the 1 yard line. And Kirby Smart said that was completely unacceptable. He took full responsibility. Did think it was interesting today at the press conference at Bucksmere Heritage Hall. I asked Kirby about the Wildcat package. I don't know if you saw the story I did this morning on Justin Fields and how he might be a factor in short yardage situations, a la Tim Tebow back in Florida's championship year. I want to say 2006, Tebow's freshman year. They used him very effectively in the Wildcat. And Kirby's comment about the Wildcat and who was running it was that was confidential. So it's not very often that Kirby Smart won't answer a question. In fact, I think this is the first time I can remember that Kirby Smart has just abruptly not answered a question. He's usually very forthcoming, but that tells you that Georgia's got something cooking. They got a plan. They may have a surprise in order. I don't know who it might be or what it might be, but it's a very creative coaching staff, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they'll do up there at Kentucky. Kentucky is not much of an offensive threat. The Wildcats are last in the league passing, only 148 yards per game. They run the ball a lot. Take a look at their rushing offense right now. Kentucky ranked fourth in the league with 214 yards per game. Benny Snell is the running back. You're going to hear his name a lot this week. Very talented back. Kirby's very impressed with his vision, his ability to find holes, cut back lanes. Currently, Benny Snell leads the SEC with 116 yards per game. He's averaging 5.2 yards per carry. So maybe not the highest yards per carry, but a guy that Kentucky really relies on heavily, and Georgia will obviously be focused on. Kirby did say once again today he needs to see more improvement from his front seven against the run. And we've said all year that was a suspect area in terms of evaluating it on a championship level. On a per team basis, it's obviously above average. It's obviously in the top 10% of the country. But to win a national championship and to win an SEC championship, it takes elite line play. And that's an area on both sides of the ball where Georgia has some room for improvement. And Kirby says this team is a work in progress. You look at last year's team and what they were able to accomplish. And while maybe it wasn't expected when you looked at the preseason polls, in hindsight, you could see a group of older, experienced guys that had been making progress, put it all together and found the inches from the previous season. This year's team, and I wouldn't use the word rebuild, but I would say there was a lot of reloading going on, whether we're talking about in the offensive backfield, but particularly on the front seven on defense, where you lost 5 out of 7 starters. including the SEC Defensive Player of the Year and Big John Atkins, that nose tackle, a guy that just haven't been able to replace efficiently. And Georgia has been a work in progress, as Kirby Smart says. And I hope the fans enjoy that process. I get the feeling that the players were pressing. They felt the need to uphold that level of play of 2017 Georgia, which in my mind was the best football team in the country, regardless of what happened in the final overtime against Alabama. That Georgia team I saw uh, was the best team I've seen in the last couple of years of college football. They just didn't play a good second half against Alabama. This year's team, it's a different team. There are a lot of familiar faces. There's so many new bodies, and to ask those new bodies to come in and play at the level that the team was playing last year was going to be a lot. Uh, to number two in the rankings, I'm not sure they were ever really the second best team. I'm not sure they are right now. But what I am sure of is I saw the program take a huge step in Jacksonville. I see and feel a lot of confidence when I'm around these Georgia football players, Kirby Smart. This team is carving its own identity. And with the win at Kentucky, I think that that makes this season a success. And Georgia fans should feel like anything that happens after winning the East is icing on the cake, just because of how competitive the SEC is and how difficult the next matchup with Alabama figures to be. You know, Georgia still got to get through Auburn after Kentucky. Then they have maybe a little bit of a breather game with UMass. Don't know if you've seen the statistics, but Georgia Tech is leading the nation in rushing. And with that shot blocking option that they play, or cut blocking, chop blocking, whatever, it's a real neutralizer of talent. And just in my mind, that just I don't, that game is not placed in a good position on the schedule. And I understand the tradition, but when they placed that Georgia Tech game on the schedule, there wasn't an SEC championship game the next week. That's something I believe Greg McGarity and Kirby Smart will fix. I just can't see that game staying there now that Georgia is an annual national championship contender. The last thing you need is to be playing a chop block or a cut block team the week before you play a conference title game and a rival at that, because those Tech kids are going to have their ears pinned back. That's their statement game. That's their championship game. They're nowhere to be found in the ACC race most years. So they're going to put everything into that Georgia game and come out there just, like a bunch of wild, you know, crazy football players and cut it loose. And that's not the kind of opponent you want. You'd much rather have a Vanderbilt team that was worried more about their finals than Georgia Tech coming in with their ears pinned back. Um, so there's one of my many wild tangents that I like to get on when I do these podcasts. I'm going to go to the broadcast here and look and see if any of you have any questions for me, or about this upcoming game or the Florida game. So taking a look here now. Pinned real time comments. Um, Jake Fromm. Okay, Jake Fromm. I think the whole key uh, for Jake Fromm was early success and receivers getting open. You know, I'm not so sure that the receivers did a real good job at LSU. And Jake's not the kind of guy that's going to talk about receivers running the wrong routes or not being where they're supposed to be. But I didn't feel like the Georgia pass game was ever in sync at LSU, and I feel like that they were put in some bad down and distance situations. I know talking with Tim Tebow last week, he really did a deep dive study into Jake Fromm, and actually it was Tebow who predicted that Jake Fromm would bounce back against Florida. But Tebow felt like the game plan let Jake down against LSU, and I would agree with that. I didn't think that was one of Kirby Smart's staff's better games. I think if they could go back and do it again, they would do some things differently. But there's a value to that. And in fact, J.J. Holloman talked about that today. He said, we needed that game. And when you're winning every game, as Georgia was, and let's face it, nobody was close to Georgia the first 6 games of the season. Nobody was winning 7 points at Georgia in the second half of any game this season as they headed to Baton Rouge. You start to think that you can get away with things in some of the smaller details start to slip by. But that was such a wake up call in Baton Rouge and such a challenge that everybody had to get back to work. The coaches had to get back to work, the players, everybody had to look in the mirror. Everybody in the Georgia football building had to decide what and where this program was headed, and had to take personal accountability in terms of how they approached their game and how they approached their work ethic. And you saw the results. I mean, that was a very disciplined performance against Florida. It was what I expected. It was what we saw at South Carolina when they absolutely destroyed the Gamecocks and what was supposed to be a big game setting. I think Georgia had gotten a little sloppy going into LSU. There were a lot of little things that finally added up. The inability in short yard to stop short yardage situations. The passing game, maybe too many guys getting in the rotation, Fromm being out of sync. I think that during the bye week, the coaching staff took a hard look at the personnel and really cut down the rotation both at running back and at receiver. And now you're seeing that competition in practice will be even hotter and heavier as more guys fight to get on the field, and then as they fight to stay on the field. Because believe me, there's a lot of talent in Georgia that stand on the sidelines right now, chomping at the bit to get in. And I think this Kentucky game will give Georgia an opportunity, to showcase their best players once again. Kentucky does run the ball effectively, but they don't throw it real effective. And therefore, I think Kirby will be able to bring the safety a little bit closer to the line, scheme some things up a little bit differently, show some looks that he hasn't shown all year. I think Kentucky's going to have a lot of trouble with Georgia. Really like Georgia in this football game. I know they opened as a 12-point favorite. It's down to 10. I think Georgia will win this game handily based on what I've seen from Georgia and based on what I've seen from Kentucky. Now, they still play it. Things can still happen. The best team doesn't always win. Sometimes there's momentum changing plays, whether it's special teams. I've seen weather play a major role in football games. Another potential neutralizing factor. I haven't looked that far into the weather report, but I know I've been up in Kentucky before in the month of November, and it can get pretty cold pretty quick. So that's something else to kind of keep an eye on. I'm going to check out your comments here on Facebook Live. See if you have any questions as we move forward on the Georgia-Kentucky game. I saw there's still tickets available in the upper deck for this game for $125. And there's lower level corners for $155. I checked that on StubHub. That surprised me a little bit, to be honest with you, because I thought, with this being Kentucky's biggest game in 50 years, that they might, have a real issue with ticket demand. But I think most Kentucky fans would just assume go see the basketball team still. Let's see here. I'm going to take a look here and see if there's any questions. Clean up the goal line offense could come back to haunt you against Kentucky, Auburn, or Bama. Amos Williams said, listen, Kirby Smart knows that better than anybody. And he addressed that again today. And I see that the tinfoil hat man says Ben Cleveland, question mark. Big Ben traveled to Jacksonville and dressed. He did not play. Kirby didn't rule him out this week. He said he doesn't know about Ben Cleveland. Also, did not rule out David Marshall, the run-stopping D end, who's had that foot injury he suffered against Vanderbilt. And David's missed the last two games. Both of those guys questionable for the Kentucky game. Hawkins Muckle, still don't know. Kirby's been very gray on that, very vague, has not been very specific. I think if Daquan Hawkins Muckle was going to be back, we probably would have heard that today. Amos Williams suggests Kirby loads the box against Kentucky this week. Kirby's approach, even against Florida, he's got so much confidence in his players that Kirby's not going to take a lot of chances on offense or defense. He's going to play percentage football. He believes in his team, and he believes in their ability to execute. So you don't see Kirby gamble a lot on either side of the ball, I don't think. You say just, stuff the run, but Kirby's going to be first and foremost careful not to give up the big play. Georgia has only given up 16 plays of more than 20 yards. That's the best in the country, and that's by design. If you want to drive the ball on Georgia, you're going to need 10, 12, 14, 16 plays. You're going to need to execute. If you have one offside, if you have one drop pass, and you get behind the chains, you're in real trouble against Georgia. So while they may give you a little bit on the front end, they're going to play that bend but don't break scheme. And also, lots of playmakers in that Georgia secondary. You see a lot of forced turnovers. The Georgia players are very good at stripping the ball. And certainly we know how good their secondary is. I believe one of the best secondaries in the country. And that's why I wrote a couple weeks ago that Georgia would be the best matchup for Alabama of all the SEC East teams that could play against Alabama. Can anybody answer why there was such big talk about Fields, but last game he wasn't even put in? Um, yeah, I can answer that. He was a great prospect. I mean, and he's still a great prospect. Quarterback is different than almost every other position, except maybe punter and kicker, right? Because you can't play him somewhere else on special teams until their time comes. You can't just quietly sub him in like you could a linebacker or a DB. You put a different quarterback in, it changes the whole identity of the team. Everything rotates around the quarterback. Uh, Listen, Justin Fields. Here's my take on it. This guy is an NFL prospect. Okay, he's got NFL arm talent. He's got incredible athleticism, and he's got a very good football IQ. He doesn't have game experience. Jake Fromm does. To me, I would use Justin Fields like Florida used Tim Tebow back in 2006 or 7, whenever it was, when Chris Leak was the starter, and they would bring Tebow in these short yardage goal line situations, like we saw against Florida, and Tebow was fine with that. Tebow didn't worry about being called a package quarterback. He had NFL aspirations, and everybody knows he did play in the league. In fact, he won a playoff game with the Broncos over the Pittsburgh Steelers. Playing in a package as a freshman did not hurt Tim Tebow's image, NFL draft stock, anything. If anything, he won his teammates over by being willing to do what he could to help the football team. It wasn't beneath him. I don't think this would be beneath Justin Fields. And in fact, we saw Georgia do this at Missouri. They put Justin in on first and goal to 7, and Justin gained 3 yards. I don't know why they took him out. In hindsight, I mean, Jake threw 2 incomplete passes, and they kicked the field goal. But I would like to see Justin in that situation. And I wouldn't be surprised if Georgia was working on that right now, because Kirby Smart and Jim Chaney are both excellent coaches, and they're going to make full use of their talent. Unless Justin has a problem with it, that's something that I think the Bulldogs will absolutely look at. But this does not reflect negatively on Justin Fields. He's played in every other game this year. It just so happened that this game in Jacksonville, there really wasn't an opportunity. Georgia was winning, and then when they fell behind quickly in the third quarter, you wanted Jake out there to have an opportunity to respond after he'd shown such a great touch in that 2-minute drill. That really got the pass game going, and it really got Jake going. So he had momentum, and that wasn't a spot you were going to take him out. So it was a circumstantial deal, no more, no less. And the reason we talk about Justin Fields so much is because he's an incredible talent, and Georgia had to work hard to get him in recruiting. And Justin bought into the program, and he's anxious to contribute. And I think you'll see some opportunities for that moving forward. Just don't know when. And it is a circumstantial deal. It is a fluid deal. I think Kirby and Jim have handled this about as well as it can be handled. I know Tebow said he liked knowing when he would go in. I mean, he was the definitive third down package guy, but they're trying to get Justin to run the same offense as Jake is, in part because they know what can happen when the starting quarterback goes down. Let's remember, Jake was not the starter at the beginning of the year, and Kirby wants a guy that can run the entire offense if Jake goes down. And so they're not just going to work Justin in packages. They're going to work him across the board and everything. And that's what's happened. And that's where he's at with it. And it's not a controversy. And talking about it doesn't make it a controversy. Talking about it is a way to educate people on what's going on and talk about possibilities with this phenomenal athlete in different ways that he might be able to contribute moving forward. Let's go ahead and take a look if there was any other questions. Did I think it was funny to see Dan Mullen try to burn you on the flea flicker he got burned on last year? I'll tell you what, it wouldn't have been so funny if that guy caught the pass because he was running wide open. It was shades of Jake missing Mecole Hardman on that opening drive against LSU. If you think about it, the way Florida kind of came apart was very similar to what Georgia did down there at LSU and very similar to what LSU did at Florida. And it just goes to show you, how important it is to execute and take advantage of those early opportunities. If Franks hits that big play early for a touchdown, the game has a completely different feel to it. The plays are called completely different. I actually thought it was a brilliant call, and I was a little surprised that Georgia would get caught off guard by that because he was running wide open. Cats have the number one scoring D, but they haven't faced talent like UGA. That is true. Kentucky is tied for the national lead, allowing 13 points a game. I don't have their game by game here as far as who they played. Let's see if I can find that real quick. But no, I'm looking. I guess their most impressive win was against Florida. I know they lost to Texas A&M. I know this too, though. Kentucky has been a double-digit underdog twice this season to Florida and Mississippi State. They won both of those games outright. So this is a team that's been doubted before. This is a program that's been counted out. They're going to circle the wagons. They've already got shock the world signs up. They can't wait to get at Georgia. They want to make a statement. This is a dangerous opponent. This is a team that's got everything to play for and nothing to lose. And Georgia, however, has a lot of big game experience. And I talked with Isaac Nada about that today. Georgia knows how to handle this situation. I see a lot of people are talking about the Justin Fields situation on this Facebook Live. See if there's any other questions on here. Why are we still slow? Why are we starting slow offensively? Tebow wants to know. Um, I think Georgia does a nice job kind of feeling out their opponent, setting things up. Maybe kind of trying out punching a lot of areas, see where the opponent is soft. Again, I think, as I said earlier, Kirby is, I think, somewhat conservative in terms of not wanting to take too many chances too early. He plays percentage football because he knows over the course of 60 minutes he's got the better team, and therefore he doesn't want to give you anything cheap or easy early on. And he certainly doesn't want to put his offense in a bad situation and turn the ball over. The most important thing to a lot of defensive minded coaches like Kirby and Gene Stallings was like this, and so was Mark Antonio. The first thing is they'll tell you they don't want the quarterback to get themselves beat. And I think that's why they're comfortable with Jake, because Jake makes a lot of high percentage decisions and typically doesn't turn the ball over. Let's see if there's any other questions on here on the Eagles on the beat segment today. Um, Taking a look here. What happened to McBride? As far as I know, he's still competing for playing time at linebacker. I'll scroll through here and look for some more questions. See a lot of Fromm and Fields talk here. I think I've explained that about as well as I possibly could. Um, let's see. Any other questions about Georgia, Kentucky? You would not say Cheney is excellent, really? Because Georgia is on pace right now to set a single season record for the most points scored per game in a season. I would say that's pretty impressive when you take a look at the talent through here, especially when you consider that Georgia had to replace two NFL running backs, an NFL wide receiver, and an NFL left tackle. I don't expect teams that lose that much to set single season scoring records, but Georgia's en route to that right now, and that's without running up the score in those early games when they had the opportunity against Middle Tennessee and Austin Peay. Griff, did I see the Florida DL choking Harris on the ground? No, but these games get awful chippy. I know Jake talked about having his eye gouged at the goal line. Kiba wants to know, do I think that Georgia can contain Snell? I do. I think he's overrated. I think Georgia will hold this guy under 100 yards. See here. Kentucky receivers aren't bad, Jonathan Crump says. Probably not, but they don't get the ball a lot because they're only averaging 148 yards per game. Look, here's the thing. I at the risk of making people overconfident, I just think Georgia's on another level as a football program. I think the Bulldogs have handled big game settings before. I think Kirby Smart has proven again and again and again that he knows what he's doing in terms of personnel, coaching, and scheme. Maybe they didn't have the best plan at LSU, but what that did was make them go back to the drawing board and sharpen some things up. I think Jake Fromm has caught stride right now. I think he's outstanding. I think he'll play well at Kentucky, and as hungry as Justin Fields is to play, if he does get the opportunity, I could see him making some big plays at Kentucky as well. I think this is going to be a great game for Georgia. I would encourage you all to follow us on dognation.com. Chip Towers and myself are going to have a lot of stories from here in Athens. Jeff Santel does such a great job on recruiting. I think there'll be some recruiting momentum. You might see that pick up a little bit. And then, of course, Brandon Adams every day at 10 a.m. with his podcast. There's no other team that has a guy like Brandon covering them. And it's such a unique opportunity to see a video podcast with somebody that's passionate and knowledgeable about Georgia. Georgia fans should really appreciate Brandon because there's nobody else in the country like him with what he does. And I'm really proud to be a part of that product and sit here and represent them. You can follow me on Twitter at MikeGriffin32. It's okay to disagree. That's why it's fun to talk football. I'm always in the Dog Nation forum. I really encourage you to check that out. We have chats in there every day. There's a lot of knowledgeable posters, and people share their opinions, and everybody treats everybody right in there. And just as a lot of your comments today, I really appreciate them, and I appreciate the opportunity to sit here and talk to you about Georgia football on behalf of Ingles. And remember, check out that Halloween candy deal they've got right now. Two big bags, $6 there, right there at the Ingles grocery store. So for the DogNation.com website, this is Mike Griffith. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I'll be on the Chip Towers tomorrow about 1 o'clock in the afternoon for the Chip and Griff Show, and we'll be talking more Georgia football. Have a great Monday.